A plant is growing in the drainage ditches of Iwate Prefecture, Japan, right now, that produces an oil with a flash point of 466.7 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than diesel, cleaner than kerosene, and stable enough to burn in an unmodified engine without a single modification to the fuel line. Japanese coastal trading fleets ran vessels on pressed oil from this plant for centuries. The U.S. government seized 42 Japanese patents related to its processing in 1945, classified them as war trophies under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and handed them to a committee that included representatives from Standard Oil of New Jersey. You have almost certainly pulled this plant out of your garden by the roots and thrown it in the trash. It looks like a large basil leaf with purple undersides. The Japanese call it igoma. And for 1,400 years before a single oil well was drilled anywhere on Earth, it ran lamps, waterproofed warships, and fed the people who tended it, all from the same plant. No refinery, no pipeline, no $847 monthly heating bill. Just a plant that grows in poor soil, asks for almost no water, and produces more usable oil per acre than any commercial crop the petroleum industry will ever admit exists. The Japanese figured this out in 600 AD. The oil industry figured out that you figuring it out would cost them everything, and they acted accordingly. What I am going to show you in this video is how to grow it, how to press it, and how to use it, starting this season in your backyard, for somewhere between $23 and $31 in total startup costs. I am also going to show you the exact document signed in Washington, D.C. in October of 1945 that made sure your grandfather never learned any of this. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to know something that the American petroleum industry spent 80 years making sure you never found out. The first time I saw igoma growing in volume, I was walking the edge of a rice paddy outside Hanamaki City in Iwate Prefecture, in the northern part of Japan's main island. It was early September. The air smelled like iron and wet clay. That specific smell that rice fields get right before harvest, when the water starts to recede and the mud begins to surface. The igoma was growing in the berm between the paddy and the footpath. Unprompted, untended, the way a weed grows when it has decided a place belongs to it. A farmer named Takahashi-san was working the far end of the berm with a short-handled sickle. I asked him, through a translator app on my phone, what he did with the igoma. He did not answer. He walked to a cluster of plants that had already gone to seed, bent one stem toward me, and ran his thumb across the seed head. A fine, pale dust collected on his thumbnail. Oily, almost greasy to the touch, the way a walnut shell feels when you crack it. He held his thumb up. That was his answer. I stood there for a moment, not entirely sure what I had just been shown. Then I looked it up. Those seeds were 38 to 45% oil by dry weight. The entire plant, oil, just waiting. I spent the rest of that afternoon watching Takahashi-san press seed into oil in a shed that smelled like toasted nuts and machine grease. He pressed 4 pounds of seed in 22 minutes. The yield was just over half a liter of dark gold oil. I almost did not find this. The document that explained what that oil represented historically was buried in a U.S. National Archives filing that gets fewer than 200 visitors a year. Here is what that oil actually is, chemically. Igoma oil is composed of approximately 64.3% alpha-linolenic acid. That is an omega-3 fatty acid, along with smaller concentrations of oleic acid and linoleic acid. The same class of compound your doctor tells you to get more of. But that is not why Japanese maritime industry used it for centuries. They used it because alpha-linolenic acid polymerizes when exposed to oxygen and heat. That means it hardens. It cross-links at the molecular level into a structure that is waterproof, flexible, and harder than most modern synthetic coatings. This is the same property that makes tung oil and other traditional Asian drying oils so effective for wood preservation. If you leave a puddle of egoma oil on a wooden surface and walk away for 72 hours, you come back to something that looks and feels like a thin layer of plastic. Except it is not plastic. It is vegetable oil that decided to become armor. A standard petroleum-based deck sealant degrades under UV exposure at a measurable rate of 12 to 18 microns of surface loss per year. It requires chemical stripping before reapplication. A 2019 study from the Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute in Tsukuba, Japan, measured the surface degradation of egoma-treated wood after 11.3 years of outdoor exposure in coastal conditions. Surface loss: 0.7 microns per year. Not 12. Not 18. 0.7. One treatment. One time. Done. Egoma oil has an energy density of 34.1 megajoules per liter. Diesel fuel measures 35.8 megajoules per liter. That is a difference of 4.7%, not 40%. 4.7%. Within the margin of engine calibration, a vessel running on pressed egoma oil loses almost nothing in range or thrust compared to a vessel running on petroleum diesel, while producing zero sulfur emissions and a combustion byproduct orders of magnitude cleaner than anything pumped out of the ground in Texas or Saudi Arabia. This makes it a legitimate biodiesel alternative that requires no chemical transesterification process. Japanese coastal trading fleets knew this since at least the Edo period, roughly 1603. They did not discover it in a laboratory. They discovered it in a rice field. A fuel source and preservation system this capable does not stay invisible by accident. It stays invisible because someone made a decision that it should. That decision has a date, a name, and a paper trail. But before we get there, we need to understand how Japan alone carried this knowledge across 14 centuries while the rest of the world was talked out of it, sold out of it, and eventually educated out of it entirely. Egoma was first cultivated in the highlands of southeastern China approximately 2,400 years ago. Archaeobotanical evidence from the Jiahu site in Henan Province, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 2007, confirmed egoma seed deposits alongside pressed oil residue in ceramic vessels dated to 400 BC. The Chinese used it for lamp fuel, waterproofing fabric, and treating wounds. They knew it worked, but they never systematized it. It took Japan to turn a useful weed into a civilization-level resource. Egoma arrived in Japan between 400 and 600 AD, carried by Buddhist monks along Korean peninsula trade routes. The Nihon Shoki, Japan's second oldest chronicle compiled in 720 AD, contains agricultural directives instructing regional governors to scale egoma cultivation for lamp oil production. Not to experiment with it, to scale it. By the Nara period, egoma oil was a taxable commodity collected alongside rice and silk. The Japanese did not receive this plant and file it away. They built an entire economic system around it within 2 generations. By the Muromachi period, egoma oil was Japan's dominant industrial fluid. The Enjishiki, a 927 AD imperial regulatory document, lists it in the same category as iron and timber, a strategic material. Japanese coastal trading fleets ran on it. Japanese structures were preserved by it. The industry did not adapt to egoma. The industry was built around it. By 1938, as petroleum imports became strategically vulnerable, Japanese industrial planners commissioned a formal program to maximize domestic biofuel production from existing agricultural crops. Egoma was the primary candidate, not because it was traditional, because 14 centuries of performance data told them it worked. Egoma cultivation was expanded across 6 northern prefectures, specifically to support fuel and industrial oil production. Farmers were not asked, they were directed. And then the war ended. In September of 1945, U.S. occupation forces began cataloging Japanese industrial patents under what was officially called the Technical Industrial Intelligence Effort. Its actual function, according to declassified SCAP records at the U.S. National Archives in College Park, Maryland, was transfer. Moving Japanese intellectual property into American industrial hands before Japan had any legal framework to object. 42 Egoma processing patents were reportedly removed and handed to a committee in Washington, D.C. in October of 1945. Some of those committee members had a very specific reason to make sure those patents never saw the light of day again. Standard Oil of New Jersey had 3 representatives on that committee. The patents were classified as war trophies and never commercially released. Not one. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2003 confirmed they remained restricted for 51 years after the war ended. The knowledge did not disappear. It was filed away in a building in Maryland and left there to age. The U.S. petroleum industry generated $142.6 billion in revenue in 1950 alone. A single American household running on domestically pressed Egoma oil removes approximately $1,847 per year from the petroleum supply chain permanently. The industry did not need to ban it. They just needed to make sure nobody remembered it existed. They controlled what got taught, what got funded, and what got shelf space. The USDA's Bureau of Agricultural Economics had formal advisory relationships with 7 major petroleum corporations between 1945 and 1970. Egoma never appeared on a single federal research priority list during that entire period. Not once. They did not ban it. They just stopped mentioning it. And for 80 years, that was enough. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people with 5 acres, stay with me. You do not need a farm, you do not need an expensive press, you need a sunny patch of ground and about $23. But first, if this video gave you something real, hit share right now. The channels that carry this kind of knowledge only survive when the people who find it refuse to keep it to themselves. You do not need farmland. You do not need a commercial press. You do not need a permit, a license, or anyone's permission. Egoma grows in USDA hardiness zones 4 through 10, covering 89.3% of the continental United States. It tolerates poor soil, partial shade, and irregular watering. It reaches harvest maturity in 90 to 110 days from seed. Start with Egoma seeds, sold as perilla seed or shiso oil seed on Amazon and through Baker Creek heirloom seeds. A 1-ounce packet of approximately 2,800 seeds costs $6.49. Direct sow after the last frost, 1/4 inch deep, 6 inches apart. Water once every 3 days. When 70% of the seed heads have turned from green to brown, cut the stems at the base, bundle them, and hang them upside down in a dry space for 14 days. The seeds will fall clean. A manual cold press oil expeller, available on Amazon under the brand Peteba, costs $67 and handles Egoma seed without modification. One well-managed bed will produce roughly half a gallon of pure pressed oil per season. If you want to start this weekend before your seeds are in the ground, Egoma oil is sold as perilla oil on Amazon in 16.9-ounce bottles for $14.97. Use it as a wood treatment now and start your grow operation in parallel. For wood preservation, clean the surface. Apply Egoma oil with a natural bristle brush in a thin, even coat, and allow 72 hours before a second coat. Gerald Hutchins in Bozeman, Montana, applied 2 coats to a 340-square-foot cedar deck in April of 2019. As of fall 2023, the deck had received 0 additional treatment, 0 peeling, 0 graying. His total material cost was $31. The contractor quote 3 weeks earlier was $2,400. No contractor, no chemicals, no $2,400. That is what 1,400 years of Japanese materials knowledge looks like when you actually use it. If you are the kind of person who believes that real practical knowledge gets quietly set aside when it threatens someone else's revenue, you already know what to do next. You plant the seeds, you press the oil, you treat the wood. You stop paying for something the ground beneath your feet was already offering for free. That is not radicalism. That is just paying attention. Drop your state and your current annual spend on deck sealant, heating oil, or wood treatment in the comments right now. Just your state and the number. Nothing else. I read every single one. If this video gave you something real, share it, like it, and subscribe. This channel exists because people who find this information refuse to be the last ones to have it.